The High Court in London has dismissed defamation and data protection claims that have been brought by social media personality Mohammed Hijab against the Spectator publication as well as journalist Douglas Murray over an article published in September 2022 that alleged that Mr. Hijab had inflamed community tensions during the Leicester unrest between Muslim and Hindu communities in the English East Midlands city. To talk about this, we have with us Mark Lewis, the lawyer for the journalist Douglas Murray as well as the Spectator. Ms. Lewis, thanks so much for speaking to us here at Times Now. What was your initial assessment of the strength of the case brought by Mohammed Hijab? At what point did you feel confident that your clients would prevail?
Well, I should clarify straight away that I represented Douglas Murray, but not the Spectator. The Spectator were represented by a separate firm of solicitors and barristers.
All right, thank you for clarifying. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
I ought to clarify that. But the point that we both looked at was here was a person who was effectively telling lies about what was said. There was a finding ultimately that he was dishonest, but every single explanation that was put forward was dishonest. And you saw a man, there was the conflict between Hindu and Muslim in Leicester. It was a very tense situation. And he turned up at it in order to throw fat on the fire to make things worse. And he then came along and said, oh, no, I was there simply to try and calm things down. He was quite clearly lying about things.
Right. And what was the cornerstone of your legal strategy in that sense as far as defending Douglas Murray against these defamation and data protection claims that Mohammed Hijab had filed? How did you ensure that it aligned with the principle of substantial truth?
Well, it was interesting because normally lawyers would perhaps for a newspaper put forward a defense saying this was reporting privilege, that newspapers are allowed to say things. This wasn't one of those cases. We didn't bother with trying to rely on journalistic privilege. We simply said two things. There was no serious harm because he has a dreadful reputation. And secondly, that what was being said by us, by Douglas Murray, was true. That this was someone who had deliberately inflamed racial tensions, had come down to cause trouble effectively to make things worse, and he can't get away from that.
Right. Also, in this particular case, the judge came out to rule that the article's claims were substantially true, and they also repeatedly refer to Hijab's testimony as worthless. Can you elaborate on the legal threshold for that term and how your team met it in this case?
Well, there are two aspects of that. Firstly, the judge went through 7 key aspects of the case and said every one of them was a dishonest explanation by Mohammed Hijab. It's not even just one. Judges often determine cases without finding that one party is necessarily lying. On this case, he found that on every case, on every situation that was relevant, it was a dishonest explanation. The judge went on to say that so much so that every explanation he gave was worthless. And secondly, the judge has ordered indemnity costs. That's quite a rare order where he's saying because of the dishonesty, the determination of the cost will be based on a significantly more onerous possibility for Hijab to say, actually, I have to prove that the costs against me were unreasonable rather than the claim of proving it was reasonable. That was a sanction by the court saying this is dishonesty. You made a dishonest claim and you gave evidence that was dishonest in support of that claim.
Right. And when it comes to this particular defamation case, Hijab had argued that his comments in Leicester referred to Hindutva, which is a Hindu nationalist ideology, rather than Hindus broadly. What were the findings as far as the courts were concerned about Hindus and Hindutva? Because there were many who took offense to the kind of comments that had been made by, Hijab, because he was essentially referring to what are matters of fundamental belief as far as Hindus are concerned.
Well, Hijab was trying to dance on the head of a pin to say that what he was referring to was Hindutva rather than Hindu. But when he was in the witness box, he could not explain why every single person that would be in Leicester protesting was necessarily somebody who followed the Hindutva ideology. He tried to suggest that there were non-Hindus who could hold the Hindutva ideology, but when he was asked to do with that, he sort of came up with Benjamin Netanyahu was a Hindutva but not a Hindu, and struggled to suggest two more people. After a time that he came up with the names of two more people, including Douglas Murray, it was all nonsense, and the attack on Hindutva was phrased in a way was saying if they believe in reincarnation. And the judge said, look, that if is not suggesting that some of Hindutva are not Hindus, but is an attack on the very one of the core beliefs of Hinduism about reincarnation. He was mocking it. And in another lecture that he gave about reincarnation from an Islamic point of view, the judge said his views were effectively childish, so something that you'd expect a school pupil to try and mock somebody's religious beliefs. He came along. He came to try and cause trouble. He came to lie about Hinduism. He has now paid a very heavy price for bringing a claim which was based upon dishonesty.
Absolutely. And we've seen the Spectator come out to describe this victory as a pushback against elements to silence the press. And as the lead lawyer, what does this outcome mean to you in the context of defending free speech in the UK? What message does this judgment send to media organizations facing similar threats of litigation from online influencers or even those who may be defending a particular ideology?
Well, it's very difficult for the press to defend some claims because the press is put into a position where the cost of defending a claim is going to be very, very expensive. And sometimes it's easier to hold their hands up and apologize for something that they haven't done wrong. Ultimately, free speech, and I do a lot of claiming cases against the press, but free speech is brought by is necessarily something that has to be free and honest speech. You know, you can't have someone coming along. Hijab was not. He was trying to stop somebody saying something that was truthful about him, and fortunately, principled people like Douglas Murray and the Spectator said, look, these are our principles. We're not going to apologize to you, even though it might be cheaper to do so.
Right. And the court has found that the videos that he publishes are at least reputationally damaging to him as the article, and therefore it can't be inferred that the article caused or would likely to be the cause of additional serious reputational harm. Was, this kind or this line something that was pivotal in terms of the entire case, because it kind of comes out and, buttresses whatever the defense would have been attempting to argue in this case?
That was one part of the defense. The defense was that what we said or what Douglas Murray said was true, but that in any event, the threshold for making a libel claim in England is to show that something caused serious harm. And the problem is that, or the problem for Hijab was that it didn't cause serious harm to his reputation because his reputation was already very low in terms of what he was saying. Look at the amount of publications that people were criticizing, and perhaps one of the best examples was he'd sold his own T-shirts, mocking himself in a way on Amazon in order to perhaps monetize things which were deliberately provocative, potentially untrue, etc., in order to make money out of it. One has to question whether the motive is all about how much money Hijab can make out of what he says, rather than looking at what he says.
Yes, and as someone who's attended the court, has been part of the arguments, and as far as the legal strategy is concerned, post the judgment, in hindsight, you view Mohammed Hijab as someone who's a prejudiced agitator who had a malicious agenda, perhaps, against other communities?
Well, it was clear that the judge found that he was an agitator that came along in order to cause trouble. I mean, whether what was done by him in Leicester, and they didn't just look at Leicester, but they looked at other events they'd done when he turned up in a Jewish area in Golders Green, when he turned up at the Israeli embassy, all designed to cause trouble, but possibly all designed to get people to follow his YouTube channel, which was monetized. Everything is monetized by him. It's very difficult to work out the whether he actually believes in what he's saying, or whether he thinks this is something that, if I'm provocative enough, will make me some money.
Right. Mark Lewis, thank you so much for taking the time out and speaking to us here at Times Now.